It was 1947 in the month of October. It was over a desert out in the western part of the States. An event happened that literally had changed the face of the globe. People did not know about it. There was no media there to cover it. At the time, it was never on any radio announcements or television announcements at the time. But what happened there was so important that literally it changed your life and my life, and all of our lives have been changed by that one event. What was it? There was a man by the name of, well, I'll hold it for just a moment, okay? Because what they were doing that day had been attempted time and time and time and time again without success. They'd come to the edge of success, and because of fear and the shaking of everything around them, they backed off every time. But upon this occasion, they had tried, they had learned, they had developed, and they did it. What are we talking about? Chuck Yeager, a pilot, on that day broke the sound barrier. When he broke the sound barrier 750 miles an hour, literally everything in aviation that day changed. I watched on the screen as we flew over. We did not do 750 miles an hour, but we were sure doing a whole lot more than the Wright brothers did when they flew across the Atlantic the first time. You see, they broke through the sound barrier. In church world, we have barriers. And if we don't identify the barriers, as a friend of mine says, if we don't identify and uncover the issues will cover us and identify us. And so in church world, we need to know what the barriers are in order that we might uncover the barriers, address the barriers, and break through the barriers. And each speaker in some way or another has been talking about breaking through certain barriers. And so for a few moments, I'm just going to be very, very practical and download it. And I know that you've had lunch and you've been through 2 or 3. So for just a few moments, I'm not going to keep you long. That's what Liz Taylor told her last husband. But I just wanted to see if y'all would recognize that. It's a boring joke. It's so pitiful. But anyway, let me just help us, if I could, because over the years, we've worked with this a whole lot in identifying certain barriers and then taking some quick steps here this afternoon. How do we break through those barriers? Let's first of all uncover the barriers, identify them. And the first barrier that I just say let's look at is a spatial barrier. A spatial barrier. In other words, you need a place. In Africa, they meet under trees. That's their place. In China, they meet in houses. All over China, they meet in houses. In your context, whatever it is, you need a space where you can gather a group of people. The church is an ekklesia. I know you pronounce it Ekklesia, right? Ekklesia, that's American pronunciation of it. Ekklesia, out of kaleo, called. The called out of, but they were called out of the communities to a place. The Greek world, that's where this comes from. And so they were called out from the communities to gather in a place to do business so they could go back into the communities and complete their business. And so that word was taken and it was adopted and it was put in the Bible, and so it became a sacred word that describes who we are. And if we do not have a place, a space, God's always had his space. He's always had his place. It may be in the house where the sacrifice and the Passover was celebrated, or it may be a dirt altar in the earlier days before Abraham, or it may be a tabernacle, or it may be a tent of meeting, or it may be a temple, and it may be a synagogue, but there's always a place. So space, without a space that you can adapt for the gathering of the people, it's a barrier. Spaces can be too big, they can be too small, they can be inappropriate, they can be any one of a number of things, but the space needs to be your place. Barrier of space. Another barrier that I'm just going to mention these, is a sociological barrier. You have a spatial barrier, you have a sociological barrier. Sociological barrier. Let me tell you about this one just quickly, because this is a key. Some years ago, a pastor in America who's a real student of church growth and development. His name's Rick Warren. Maybe you've heard of Rick. And Rick made this observation after studying, because the average church in America is a group of about 60 to 80 adults. That's the average church in America. And he made this observation after study. He said there's a sociological phenomena that is occurring. It's called the primary group, and the primary group is 60 to 80 adults. And when 60 to 80 adults get together, they begin to formulate a society where everybody has an identity, a relationship, an ownership, and all those things that can become very narcissistic in nature. And so you got the primary group. It's a sociological barrier. The next barrier that I just mentioned to you is the Scriptural Barrier. Some people get the idea that the Bible is written just for them, about them, and not anybody else. Step across the line of faith, and as someone in the conference mentioned, you step across the line of faith and it doesn't pass anywhere. It ends with me. And so we have a scriptural barrier of a lack of understanding, and miss the fact that there's a miraculous mission that God has given us to do, an exciting mission that God's given us to do. Fourth is a spiritual barrier. We know that we need a capacity beyond ourselves to do what God has given us to do. Could I just tell you that reaching people and developing people is a very, 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 very difficult thing to do. By the way, churches grow from the outside in, but they develop from the inside out. And you should not get those two movements confused. Let them stand as parallel tracks like a railroad track. We came up on the railroad. You got parallel tracks. Those two parallel tracks, they don't touch. They're there. And both are necessary to move the train from point A to point B, and so is it with church. There is a spiritual barrier. Capacity beyond our abilities. Strategical barriers. Strategic. There is also the need for us to think about strategies. Drifters, someone said, won't plan. Dreamers don't plan. Achievers do plan and execute the plan. Structural barrier. Organization. We talked about systems and structure. You need a structure that is geared for the people. Leadership barrier. Lids. Leadership. Lids on your personal leadership. Could I tell you the hardest person you'll ever lead is you? And unless you can lead yourself, it's very difficult to lead others. And so you have to lead yourself into a growing experience, or you become the lid in your church. Leadership lids. The lack of leadership. The lack of leadership and development of leadership. These are all barriers. Now, what do you do when you have barriers? Well, what you do is you address the barriers. If you do not address the barriers, what you will do is that you will back off. You'll back off and you become a status quo person. I'm looking for a clock somewhere. Andy? Is anybody timing me? I can barely see that one, but I guess it's okay. Looks like I got 30 minutes. Is that right? No. Okay. How do you address the barriers? And let me just take you through these really, really fast. Number one, embrace a think big attitude. A pastor friend of mine wrote a book. It's entitled, Go Big, I Dare You. Go big, I dare you. Think big. Think big. You got to go big. Why do I say that? Have you ever thought about how big the universe is? Have you ever thought about that on Monday evening, we got on a plane and 5,000 miles approximately later, we landed in London. And we're not even halfway to China. Have you ever thought about how big this world is? And then I've been thinking and reading recently about how big the cosmos is and how big the planets and the universes are. Not one, but many. And I look at all that and I think, our God is not, He's interested in the small things. He's interested in the details of your life. But He is a big, big God. And if I'm going to think about what He's doing and I'm going to think small and acquiesce and capitulate to a culture or to my own thinking, so we have to think big. And when you think big about what God is doing, you know, people have a tendency to go with something that's bigger than they do with something that doesn't take anything. And so you present to your people that you're leading, we serve a big God, we've got a big world to reach, and we've got everything we need. He is a big, big God. And so commit yourself to lead big. Lead beyond. One pastor said you need to be thinking 10 times beyond where you are. So think big. Secondly, convert your vision to a message. Joe Frost did a wonderful job. I went to her session. A wonderful job of talking about how do you create a message. And if you've got a vision, if you have a vision of what you are about and what God has given you to do, there's a vision there. Let me say that you got to convert the vision to something else. Vision is a picture. Mission is a purpose. Vision is a picture. And when you have that vision, you've got to convert that vision to a message so you can say it, so people can see it, so they can feel it, so they can engage with it, they can own it and find fulfillment with it. You've got to do that. So you've got to develop a message, convert your vision to a message, and then begin to share your story. Share it. Share your message. Find different ways to do that. Number 3, build leaders. Build leaders. It takes great teams to win big. If you're going to win big, you got to have a team that can go big. And so when you go big with a big team, expect to win. Maxwell was referred to a few moments ago. John Maxwell in his book, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, great title, by the way. In that, he's got a chapter on the inner circle. We used to call it, just very simply, because we weren't brilliant like John is in packaging things, we just to say the people that are closest to you. Well, he took that and made it the law of the inner circle. And really what he's saying is the level of your effectiveness, success, and achievement will be determined by those who are closest to you. Those who are closest to you will make the difference in whether you break through the barriers that we just listed. So you've got to have leaders. Build leaders. Know the principle of multiplication, that leaders who reproduce themselves multiply the effectiveness. Leaders who reproduce themselves multiply their effectiveness. You want to be effective? You want to go through the barriers? You got to have a team. Chuck Yeager had a team. He had people that had gone before him. And with that team, he was able to break through. When he was going to the edge of the sound barrier, the plane began to shake. It began to shake. Sounds were horrible. It just felt like they were going to do what had been previously done, and that was explode in the air. And when the sonic sound occurred and the boom was so great, those on the desert floor thought what happened was what had happened before. But Yeager had a team who had worked diligently, studied, planned, shaped the plane in the shape of a bullet. And they broke the sound barrier. He had a team around him. It was a great enterprise. Listen, you and I are in the greatest enterprise upon this planet. There's no enterprise comparable to what you and I are doing. And so we need to build a great team of leaders. Number 4, structure yourself for growth. Decide what is important and is productive and what is unimportant and non-productive. You can spin your wheels on a lot of things, but you need to get traction with the things that will make a difference. And you structure yourself to do that. You multiply. Number 5, develop an army of volunteers. Tim Keller was referred to a little bit earlier. I read some things that Tim had written about volunteers, and he said the more people you reach and the more effective you are, the more critical it is that you have an army of volunteers. You've got to raise not only leaders, you got to have volunteers. You got to have people who will do the volunteer work. You have to have some who will lead teams. Those are leaders. But you have to have teams of the executors who execute, and they do it in such a way that they have an impact. I was just mentioning, I spoke at Mark's church a couple of years ago. When I walked up and people were out on the sidewalk greeting me. And do you know what I felt? I felt welcomed. They didn't know who I was. They didn't know that I was a guest speaker. Oh, we're taking care of the guest speaker. Yeah, we're doing that. No. I just walked up and they were greeting people. I could see them doing it. There was a sense of those people, those volunteers were doing a great thing, making a huge impact. Raise up an army, not just a few, but an army of volunteers. Find ways to do that. Develop an army of volunteers that you can preach, you can lead, but you got to have those volunteers. Number 6, value flexibility. Value flexibility. If you get so stuck in a routine that you become rigid, what happens is when you have to change to stay current, I'm not talking about your message, I'm not talking about those primary principles, but I'm talking about those ancillary things that have to be adjusted. That if you don't have flexibility built in with your people, what'll happen is they'll become so rigid, they will latch on to something. They'll latch on to a program that you cannot possibly change. So value flexibility, practice flexibility, teach flexibility with your people. And it helps you to break through those rigid barriers. Moving right along, do a call to action. Execute the thing. Execute it. You know, it's one thing to sit around the table and plan. It's another thing to get up and do it. Issue a call to action. Number 9, evaluate. Evaluate. We had young pastors, the Fellowship Church, and there in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, at multiple locations. He says delegation without investigation is an abomination. He likes it to rhyme. I would just say be sure and evaluate. Evaluate. Number 10, connect with the culture. Connect with the culture. Okay, the church has historically done 2 things. 1, the church has combated the culture. The culture it's contrary to our value system. So you end up warring against the culture. And when you do, you become irrelevant. And you become someone that no one wants to connect with. Or the church, on the other hand, has capitulated to the culture. Now, this is in the U.S., but I know that this is greater than the U.S. They've capitulated to the culture. And therefore, they lose their distinctive. There's no distinctive to them. They just are caught up in and carried away with. So what do you need? You need to be able to connect with the culture. You need to be wise as a serpent and as harmless as a dove. Be careful in how you say what you say, because how you say what you say is as important as what you say. And so be careful how you say what you say. And Joe's doing a great job in helping you to do that. But you got to connect with the culture. When you connect with the culture, what gives you the opportunity to be is a catalyst of change. Catalysts or catalytic things always bring about change and do not lose their essential properties. The Christians have not had to lose their essential properties for these 2,000 years to be catalyst of change in the culture. That's how you break through a barrier. A couple of other things and then I'm done. Change to improve. Change to improve. Change to improve. Where you need, after you have done your critique, your evaluation, make changes. And let people know what you're doing about that. The appropriate audience with the appropriate message about what you're doing. Make change. Because if the barriers have been there and you've tried all this time and you've not changed anything, understand you got to be changing something to break through those barriers. So change. Make changes. Make them wisely, but make changes. And then the final thing I'd say, celebrate your wins. Celebrate your wins. You change to improve and you find that there's some progress somewhere, celebrate it. Celebrate small wins, not just the big wins. Celebrate the wins. You made progress over here. It seems small, but let me suggest to you, it may not be small to the people that have made the effort to make the change and the breakthrough. So celebrate the wins, because as you celebrate the small wins, it gives you the opportunity to have more wins. And the more wins you have, the more you have to celebrate. And the more wins you have and the more you have to celebrate, the greater is your momentum. And momentum is a barrier breaker. Y'all know the story about the railroad train? Y'all do. You should. I mean, this ought to be yours, not mine. I mean, here I'm the one telling you this, and you're the one who knows more about it than anybody. But a train sitting still, you can stop it with a block of wood. You can keep it from moving forward. Not moving forward. It's got a block of wood in front of it. You can't get it going. You take a train running 30 miles an hour and a concrete block wall, can't stop it. It's the law of momentum. And as you develop momentum, you can break through the barriers. The barriers, sometimes, God lets them be raised to challenge us and test us and strengthen us. But they're never there to permanently keep us from fulfilling the mission and painting the vision that God's given us. I pray God's blessings on you as you break through more and more barriers. And could I say that this conference, Ekklesia Conference, is about elevating everyone so that together we can all be stronger and break through any barrier that the enemy builds in front of us and blast through it and give God the victory. And let the sound not be the sound of disaster, but let it be the sound of progress and God's people moving forward. Thank you all. God bless you.